Hi everyone. The lesson is Properties Part 1 Introduction in Objective-C. We'll be using these tools and documents for referencing. You need to make sure you look at these prerequisite lessons and you can find the link to download this in the description. You'll be learning about declaring properties, especially using employee class as an example and about default property attributes. As usual, it's going to be practical demonstrations. So let's go and start the practical now. So create a new Xcode project. Make sure it's you select macOS command line tool, click next, give a meaningful name and make sure the language is Objective-C and select a suitable location to save it. And click create. So it should create the project and you should get this. Click on the left hand side, the project navigator, and then let's create a class using this. So let's create a class, right click, new file. So let's create a employee class. Let's click next. Let's say employee as example, right? And the subclass of n is going to be a subclass of ns object. So the parent class will be ns object. Let's create it. Just say create. Awesome, right? So now you have the employee class created. And also we'll be using Apple developer docs for referencing, right? Um, so if you look at the developer docs, it talks about properties, right? Properties to control access to objects values. So an object has values. So to control access to these values, we use properties, right? So in other words, properties are attributes and you can control accessing the values using the properties, right? Awesome. So now, so in the employee class, let's declare some properties, right? So you put add property and then you will give the data type. Let's say int employee number, for example, right? And then let's say add property string, ns string. Let's say so it should be a pointer. Let's say the employee name, and let's say property int. Let's say the age of the employee, and let's say property int salary of the employee, just as an example. So I created 4 properties. Now you don't have to do anything for the implementation at this moment. If you are just using these properties to assign the data, you could just live with this and let's write something in the main method. Let's say starting, and then let's say I want to use that employee class. So first thing I have to do is I have to import the employee.h, and then I can declare an object of employee. It should be a pointer, say e1. And now you have seen in our previous lessons, you have to pass the message alloc. So you have to say employee alloc. So you have this message passing. So it will invoke the alloc method and allocate memory. And then you need to initialize. So we have done this in our previous lesson. So allocate and initialize. After that, when you got properties, so we got 4 properties, you can access them. Like say for example, you can see e1 dot employee number is 1. C1 dot employee name, say the name is John, let's say, right? And let's say E1 dot age, let's say John's age is, let's say, 40. E1 dot salary, let's say John has a salary of 50,000 annual salary, right? Okay, and now you can just output the data, right? If it's just to output the data, you can say nslog and you can say employee data, just for example, right? And then you can output another nslog just to decorate it. Let's copy this, let's put this down, and let's say let's underline this, right? And then let's output the data, right? Once again, let's say this is let's say you want to output the employee number equals to then you put a comma, and then you will say e1 dot emp number. Then as usual you will put the percentage format specifier. The same way we will output the name, age and the salary. Okay, so I have written the code to output the name, age and the salary. So let's run this. Let's click the run button and let's see the basic output. So this is a very simple exercise example, just showing you that you can declare the properties and assign the data and just output it, right? Awesome. Now let's go into the next step. So if you look at the developer docs, when you talk about properties, then the next thing it talks is property attributes indicate data accessibility and storage consideration. So what are property attributes? So we'll do another lesson after this about property attributes in detail, but for now you can see when you are declaring a property, you can specify attributes. You can specify property attributes, right? Such as, see, it says read only, right? Let's give a try on this now. For example, let's say now when you declare these properties over here, you can open brackets and then you can give extra attributes. Say for example, the salary, let's say the salary you need to protect, so that you don't want any outside programs to assign data into the salary. In that case you can say this is read only, right? In that case, when you have a read only property, the outside programs can't assign data. Now for example, when I say outside program, now this is the employee class. So compared to the employee class, the main method is outside program. Even though it's in the same project, still it's outside the employee class. So now the main method, because it's outside to the employee class and because the employee class says it's read only, now if you try to assign data into that read only salary from over here, if you compile this now, you will get an error. See, you get a build fail and it says assignment to read only property. So now you understand with this simple exercise that properties, you can declare attributes and those attributes will indicate the data accessibility. Now for example, when you say read only, it's not accessible from outside. So if someone try to access it and assign the data, it gives error. So that is what it says as property attributes indicate accessibility. Not only that, and storage conditions as well. So as I said earlier, we will be doing a detailed lesson in a little while about properties, but this is just to introduce you about properties. And then in this lesson, we are also discussing that properties, there are default property attributes. I repeat, there are default property attributes. So what does that mean? What that means is, now when you declare properties, let's say I made it read only, but when you start typing read only, you can see there's another option called, another property attribute called read write. Now by default, a property is read write, so I don't have to tell it explicitly like this, right? So even if I said it, that's fine. When I make it read write, right, so I can read and write into the property. So if I compile this program, it should not give error and it's successful. But the thing is, so it's a default property attribute, so which means even if you don't say that, it's read write. So even if you don't say, right, the property is read write. So the part of this lesson is for you to know that there are default property attributes such as read write and atomic. So by default there are certain properties, so we'll be talking about those in detail in a little while, but for now you know that there are default property attributes as well. So let's look what's next. So if we read more about properties in the developer docs, it says objects can have properties intended for public access. So by default, properties are public access, meaning you can use it from outside. So when you have a property declared, because it's public, that's why the main method can access the properties, right? Awesome. If you define a class to represent human, right, for example, then for a person you will have properties like first name and the last name, right? Okay, so it's explaining a few things, right? So And then going down, it talks about, as I said earlier, property attributes, right? So let's read little more from this about property attributes. So it says, for example, if you it can be read only, and it says you can read more about this in this next section over here. So let's open that. So when you open that, that section talks more about properties, right? So declare public properties. That is what we have done, right? Property access. Uh, let's read more. And then it talks about using accessor methods to get or set property values, right? So using accessor methods, right? So let's read more about that. So when you declare properties, by default they will get the get methods and set methods, meaning accessor methods. Now in this example I did not use those accessor methods, but let's start another example when we will use the accessor methods, right? So let's do it now. So for example, when I have these properties, at the moment I was directly assigning the data like this using dot notation, right? So that is possible, right? And I'm accessing them back using the dot notation. But let's look into this now about the property attributes and the accessor methods, getters and setters. You can see once you declare object, you can call the setter methods like set first name. So in my case, it will be, if I got a property called name, it's set name or set age or set salary. Same as that, if you want, you can directly refer them by passing a message to the property. For example, I can access it through the message age. So to make it clear to you, let me write, then you will understand what I mean, right? So let's say in my program, whenever I want to access it, let's say I'm going to refer that style. So some person first name. So see over here. Now, if I want to access the property, I can pass a message. So I can say E1, let's say employee number. Now, as you can see, when I'm using it this way, it says it's M here, right? So whereas when I say E1 dot name, can you see that it puts a P here? So when I put a dot and try to access, I'm directly accessing the property, right? When I put a dot and access, because you can see when I put a dot and say emp, let's say name, see it gives, let's say I'm accessing the name, let's say the name is a property, right? So let's say e1 dot salary, see e1 dot salary, it gives it as a property, right? So if I put a dot notation and access, it's considered to be a property. But the same salary, let's say if I want to access it, just I'm giving example, without putting dot notation, if I call the method like message passing e1 salary, now you can see it's referring the method. So in this case, this is the getter method of the property, and this getter method is auto generated because as you see, I didn't write any method, I just declared only the properties. So this, when you declare a property, it will automatically get a getter method and a setter method. So if I try to access the salary, it gives me the method. So same, let's say now I want to access the employee number, right? So it gives me the employee number method. So this is the getter method. So this is what it talks here in terms of accessor methods to get or set. So these accessor methods are getters and setters, right? Awesome. The getters and the setters. So let's look into that now further. So let's change all of them into that. So let's say over here also I want to access E1 name, right? Okay, and one small thing, this should be the name, this should be the age, this should be the salary, right? So then same I can do for the age and the salary. So now I'm calling all the getter methods of the properties which are automatically generated. Same if I want, I can assign data using the setter methods over here, right? Set first name. these are auto generated. So if I'm using the setter methods, I would say instead of e1.employee number, I will use a setter method. I will say e1 set emp number. So remember this set emp number method, the setter method is auto generated based on the property. Because my property emp number is an integer, then for the setter method the parameter is going to be a integer, as you can see here, right? So set employee number 1. Then this, so my name property is a ns string. So in that case, if I'm trying to assign the name using the setter method, which means e1, but you have to say set, right? Set name, you can see the parameter is a ns string, and you can see it's a method. So this, as I said earlier, explained, this is the setter method, and it is auto generated, right? When you declare the properties, they will auto generate these getters and setters, right? So let's now assign the age and the salary as well. So now I'm assigning data using all setter methods, set name. And once again, to remind you, they are auto generated. You don't get them because you don't get to see them because they are auto generated, and you can use these getters and setters. So when I run, the output will be the same, right? So when I run this, I will see the same output, but this time the difference is I'm not directly accessing the properties using the dot notation. Instead of that, I'm using getters and setters. Now you might wonder why you need these getters and setters when you can just put a dot and access it like we did in the earlier example, right? Because in the earlier example, we directly access it with a dot. As you can see here, you put the dot notation and access. Then now what we did was we use the setters here and the getters. Now you might wonder why we have this mechanism of getters and setters, right? So that we are going to discuss in more detail with a practical in the next lesson. Now let's see what's remaining in this lesson. So we successfully did the practical demonstration for this lesson, and conclusion is you learn about declaring properties, and especially you saw some default property attributes, and on the next lesson after this we'll be discussing more detail about default property attributes, and then you saw about using default getters and setters. Once again, in another lesson after this we'll discuss about custom getters and setters and why you really need these getters and setters. You can find the link to download the source code in the given description. We use Apple developer docs and for referencing. Okay, have a look at our other videos, and also make sure you look at part 2 of this video, which is the next one. And we are very excited to see you in our next video to continue this lesson. See you until that.